This talk is going to extend on this. It's called the behind the scenes of the Apache Software Foundation. It's not behind the scenes in the sense that there's like secrets that I'm revealing here. It's basically, as we've tried to explain in the previous keynotes already, is the ASF is a very, very open organization. Before I continue, just a few comments about myself. My name is Lars Eilebrecht. I'm an independent security consultant. I used to be based in London for the last 10 years. I actually moved to this beautiful city of Berlin last month. So the first ApacheCon, and I've been to many Apache conferences, where I'm actually local to the city where the conference takes place. I've been contributing to Apache Web Server since 1996. I'm a member of the ASF security team, and yeah, if you've been to the founders panel, I'm one of the co-founders of the ASF. What I want to cover in this presentation is basically explaining what is the Apache Software Foundation, the ASF. David Nelly already explained this. It's a US non-profit, a charitable organization incorporated in the state of Delaware in 1999. And one of the important and unique things about the ASF is we only have individuals as members. As a company, you cannot subscribe or pay to become a member or to buy yourself a seat on the board of directors. So the ASF does not pay for anyone to do software development. All the work is done by volunteers. We do have a few exceptions where by now we actually do pay for certain services. We do not really have employees, but we do pay for certain services. One of them is the system administration. Like we have people on the infrastructure team who get paid to make sure that things are running. The times in the very beginning where we had 20, 30, 40 people working on projects, it was possible to do this on a voluntary basis, but now it's like 7,000 committers. If some of the important infrastructure goes down, yeah, you see where this is going. So system administrators, we pay for some secretarial services, executive assistant and some press services. So that's things we pay for as a service, but in general, the development, the software development is all done by volunteers. And that also includes the volunteer work, like people who contribute to the foundation, not in terms of like contributing code, but contributing their time to grow the foundation, basically. Let's step back a little bit. Mark Cox in the founders panel mentioned this a little bit, and Dirk Willem as well, that in 1995, the most popular web server was the NCSA web server. And many people were using it, but it was becoming unmaintained. The budget, the grant money that the university had for the NCSA HTTPD was running out, but people were using it. So at some point, some people got together, and Brian Behlendorf was the one who actually created a mailing list on his personal, or one of his personal websites called New HTTPD, and invited the various people to come and discuss how they can extend the NCSA web server and maybe create a new web server. Well, the good thing was the NCSA web server was published under an open source license, a BSD-style license, so it was actually possible to just take the source code and work with it, basically. So here's a picture that was taken at the very, very first ApacheCon 1998. So that predates the creation of the ASF, of the foundation, which shows not all, but most of the members of the Apache group. I'm the geeky-looking guy in the middle with the red shirt. Sometimes I get asked, so where does the name Apache come from? Why Apache? There's one explanation that's kind of true, but not really true, is that has come from the term Apache server, because we had this mailing list, New HTTPD, exchanging patches to make things better, to fix bugs, etc. So with all these patches going back and forth, we had a Apache server. Someone mentioned that, and it kind of became retrospectively the reason why it's called Apache. However, the name was originally, I think, proposed by Brian Behlendorf out of respect for the various Native American nations collectively referred to as Apache. They are well known for their endurance and for their strategy, and also have a very distributed organizational structure, or not really organizational structure, but a very distributed structure. And that was the same with the Apache group. We had members on different continents and from different backgrounds. Looking at the web server software at that time, things have changed in the last few years, but throughout the last 20 years, or more than 20 years, like we've had the highest market share we've ever had was somewhere around 72 or 73%. I think one of the reasons why the Apache became so successful was obviously it was the right time. It was like 1995, around that time was a time when the web and websites were taking off. The whole web was still in its infancy at that time. But that changed rapidly, and the Apache was available under an open source license, under the Apache software license, and therefore free to use. And it had actually a modular design which made it easy to adapt it to how you wanted to run your website. You could use static pages. There was mod PHP, which for a certain period of time was actually an Apache project. Now they are separate. There's mod Perl and a few other things. So you had at that time, or still, a very modern web server that would meet the requirements of various websites, whether just it's a small personal thing, an internal website, or actually what you would consider a high-traffic website at that time. But we needed more than just a kind of like a loose group of people. There was no legal entity, there was no organization. And we created the ASF for various reasons. One was we needed protection. We saw abuse or potential threat from companies who tried to abuse the brand name, tried to make money with Apache in certain ways, or were simply, let's say, annoyed at the market share of the Apache web server. And we also had companies like IBM at that time who wanted to use the Apache web server as part of one of their products, IBM WebSphere. But they couldn't wrap their head around the fact that there's no organization. How can we partner with something that's just a bunch of guys exchanging patches on a mailing list? So all of these reasons led to the decision to actually create the ASF. And what it provides is, if you do open source development, you can go to like GitHub and put your source code there and put an open source license on it. Yes, that's open source. The ASF provides that basic development environment, which today is easy to get. Back then, it wasn't that easy to actually get all that for your project that you wanted to start or were running. But the ASF provides more. It provides basically an environment where people can collaborate. And the Apache license is an important part of that, because one of the requirements for an Apache project is that it must be distributed under the Apache software license. As a user, you can be assured that if you go to apache.org, one of the project web pages, and download something, that it will be under the Apache license. And basically, back in the day, you could just publish something, but the days where it's possible for a developer to just publish something are kind of over. You need to worry about potential lawsuits. And we saw this back in the day, that individual developers were threatened with a lawsuit, whether about copyright, patents, whatever. So the Apache software license and the ASF as a legal entity protects and shields the individual developers from this potential threat. And most important, the ASF as a non-profit organization is able to solicit donations and provide resources in the form of infrastructure, creating events, ApacheCon, hackathons, and contribute that back to the community. Yeah, I've already mentioned the software license. Talking about a few numbers, David already mentioned this to some extent in his keynote, in his State of the Feather keynote. We started with just 3 projects. Apache Web Server, the Jakarta project, out of which we got Java applications such as Tomcat, and a conference planning project. Very quickly, we got additional projects, and if you look at it today, we have more than 350 projects and initiatives, and about 50 so-called podlings in the Incubator project. I'm going to explain the Incubator in a little bit more detail in just a minute. And yeah, we started with 21 committers, and now we have something like 7,500 committers and more than 760 members of the foundation, and a total of 200 million lines of codes sitting in our source code repositories. David showed this chart already, so basically over time you see that we have a very, very steady growth of committers. And if you look at this in terms of active committers, we actually see fairly regularly over the last months or years actually that there's always between 1,500 to 2,000 active committers every month. And I think that's quite important to show that there's still things happening. There's not just new projects, and there's still activity in all these projects. An important part of the ASF is meritocracy. It's about basically, the ASF is organized as a so-called meritocracy. Basically, it's about responsibility. It's about the ability and talent. Basically, the more you contribute, the more merit you get, or the more merit you have, and you get, or you have more power to do things. Power as in people listen to you. It's not power in the sense that your job title allows you to make decisions. It's basically, if you have been one of the major contributors, people will listen to what you have to say on the mailing list. And that kind of like an important development philosophy at the ASF, to base this on merit. So basically the responsibilities are given based on the demonstrated ability and talent that you have. And as I explained earlier, it's not just about code contributions. Contributions can come in all forms and sizes. Just to briefly explain what's sometimes referred to as a chain of merit. I'm not sure I really like this term anymore, but it kind of shows that obviously at some point you start using one or more Apache applications, Apache software as a user. You can become becoming a contributor is a very small step, actually. It doesn't mean code contributions. It can mean participating on the development mailing list, helping or answering questions from other users on the user mailing list, helping other users. It can mean suggesting new features or fixing bugs in the documentation, and obviously code contributions. If you contribute to a project at some point, it depends, each project handles this slightly differently, but typically if you have an interest and show that you want to contribute to a project, you are made a committer of that project. In some cases, you basically just ask, can I join you guys? I want to help with this, or it's something I'm using as well. In some cases, you have to first start with committing some or submitting some patches and some contributions, and then you will be made a committer. As I tried to explain this morning in the founders panel as well, becoming a foundation member, or sorry, quickly going back to the project member, Most projects typically don't have this separate step anymore. I think some projects, like the web server project, still has it, where there's a difference between a committer, someone who has commit access to the repositories, versus someone who is a so-called project or PMC, project management committee member, like the core team of the project. For most teams, that's the same thing these days. But there's no direct requirement to be one of these things or being a committer before you can become a foundation member. And I mentioned this morning. Some valuable contributions we have received from members and from individuals who've never developed a single line of code. But the more common way is obviously by participating in one or maybe even more projects and showing an interest in the foundation itself, that at some point you will get invited to become a member of the foundation. And on this wonderful slide, which is very, very high level, I want to explain a little bit how this process works, because I get asked this quite frequently, like, how do I become a member of the foundation? What do I need to do? Basically, being a US corporation, we have to have a member meeting once a year, and we use that to talk about the budget, what the board has done, and etc. So that's the basic corporation things we have to do. But we also use that to vote in new members. Basically, to become a member of the foundation, it needs a majority vote. So more than 50% of all the existing members have to vote yes to make someone a member of the foundation. And before the meeting, we typically have a period of, I don't know, at least a month or two, where people would nominate existing committers or individuals for membership in the foundation. And we do rely on our members to actually find these people who they think should become a member of the foundation. And in some cases, we have a list of more than 100 something nominations. And I think typically there have only been very few exceptions I can recall where someone who was nominated wasn't elected. So typically, if someone gets nominated, there is typically a reason for this, and it's usually very likely that that person will then, after the meeting, become a member of the foundation. So what does that mean? As a member of the foundation, you're basically one of the stakeholders of the foundation. We have the board of directors, which also gets elected once a year at that same membership meeting. Again, there's a nomination period, so people tend to nominate others who they think should be on the board because of the work they are doing or because of their contributions, basically. And the board basically oversees the ASF. It's not like the individual projects have to listen to technical advice. As David said, there is no CTO who tells people this is what we should do from a technical point of view. Every project is basically individual. Otherwise, this whole thing wouldn't really scale. We have more than 350 projects. They work individually. They can make decisions on how they want to run their day-to-day operations, when they want to do a release, what kind of features they put in there. And one, I think, interesting thing is also with the ASF, which is different to, I think, a company. There's absolutely no problem with having projects which fill the same need. Like we have multiple web servers at the ASF. We have several applications which basically do the same thing. As long as there's a community, a healthy community around each of these projects, that's perfectly fine. So going back to this diagram, so we have the users, the contributors, and the governance bit is what's important. The board cannot do everything themselves. Basically, how they exercise their oversight of the different projects is by appointing so-called project chairs, like the VP of a project. So basically, even if you have a very new project with just a few people, there will be one person assigned to be the VP of Apache XYZ. And that doesn't give that person the power to make decisions over everyone's head or technical decisions. It basically comes with responsibilities, which includes regular reporting towards the board of directors. To see, is the project still healthy? Are there any issues? Is there anything where the board may need to take action? Are there any legal issues or anything really? And that's basically what the VP is responsible for. So VPs are the officers of the foundation in this chart. We talked a little bit about communication already in the previous keynotes. At the ASF, it's all about mailing lists, which sometimes to new people joining a project takes some getting used to. We're all distributed. We're not just sitting in the same office. And a very important statement from Roy Fielding is basically, if it didn't happen on the mailing list, it didn't happen. So yes, other means of communication, instant messaging platforms, whatever, can be used, but any kind of decisions or relevant information has to come back to the mailing list in the form of someone posting about it, or this is what like a proposal to give people a chance to contribute and to maybe vote on it, or to maybe have some feedback about it. Sometimes dealing on the mailing list can be, on a busy mailing list can be a bit difficult. So sometimes I get asked, how are decisions actually made? It's like someone said something about a new feature and then there's 50 responses to that email, and then how do we know what's going to happen? One thing that, if you're not used to it, that you may find odd in the beginning on a mailing list is people responding with just a +1 or a -1 in their response, but nothing else. What that simply means is, yes, you can just write something about what was said in the previous email in your reply, but if you want to simply provide a statement of, yes, I'm in favor of this, whether it's a new feature, the release date, or a change or something, you just say +1. It's basically like, add me to the list of people who are in favor of this, whether it's an official vote, which usually gets put into the subject line, in brackets, vote, or just another normal email where just people show that they're in favor of whatever is being discussed. Same as like if it's a -1, it's a veto. It's basically I disagree with this plan or with this change or with this patch. However, you cannot just continue emailing and saying like I'm against this, I'm against this. This doesn't work. Basically, if you respond with a -1, you have to provide a reason why you're against this. That's often reasonably straightforward. Well, not always, but if it's a patch, there's usually a technical reason why maybe that patch doesn't make sense, or maybe there's a bug in it. Maybe sometimes people automatically point out, I'm -1, but here's the thing you need to fix, and then this is a +1 for me. Rarely, but sometimes people say also 0, which is like I abstain or I'm not sure about this. Another thing that's common in the software development projects is how commits are done. There's RTC versus CTR, review then commit versus commit then review. So basically the mailing list also help with this because everyone is distributed in different time zones. So if you're working on let's say a stable branch, it would typically be a review then commit way of handling changes to the branch. Basically, you have to show your patch first. This is what I want to commit, and you need a few +1s before you're actually allowed to commit this. Again, every project handles this in a slightly different way, but it's very common to have these two approaches, typically stable branch, where there's a non-stable branch or a development branch, where basically it's like, okay, everyone just commit ahead do your changes, and people are expected to retrospectively review a patch that has been committed. We talked a bit about the term the Apache Way, and that's kind of part of this as well. If you ask different people to define what the Apache Way is, you get slightly different answers. I would say that it relates to how the ASF is basically structured and how it operates. So it means different things to different people, but I mentioned the earned authority, the merit. I mentioned the community of peers. So we have individuals, we don't have organizations who make decisions on which features get included or when the release is being made. We have open communication. We have public mailing lists. All development mailing lists are open. Everyone can just subscribe to that mailing list and start discussing the development or starting to contribute. We have consensus decision making. We have this voting. We have what I mentioned with the review then commit or commit then review, like lazy consensus. Even if there's like hundreds of developers in a project, if I get 2 or 3, depending how it's defined, 2 or 3 plus 1 votes, I'm good to go ahead and commit my patch. And we have this responsible oversight from the foundation's point of view, the governance, but also the trust and the delegated oversight, and let each project basically handle their day-to-day business and operations. And then it's the Apache license, how the projects are managed, and the community over code part, where we've already mentioned in the keynote this morning, it is really about the people. The people is what matters. The code is important, obviously, that's what we want at the end. But without the community, without a healthy community, that simply doesn't work. And it's also the we're all volunteers on these projects. Yes, some people get paid by a company to contribute to a particular project, but we need diversity in a project. We don't have projects that's just developed by one company. There's always a mix of people from different companies, different geographical regions, different countries, and different interests that participate in a project. So this diversity ensures that a project is able to survive, and that brings me back to the incubator. I'll talk about this in a minute. Maybe one brief comment about the Apache Feather. About 3 years ago, someone actually thought it's time to change the Apache Feather. The one on the left-hand side is the original one that I think it was Randy Turbush proposed after Brian mentioned the Apache name. He said, okay, if you want to call it Apache, looks good to me, but here's like a logo. How about we combine this, and then that's what we call our new web server. And everyone basically said, like, yeah, that looks good to me. So we had this Apache Feather for basically over 17 or almost 17 years, or actually more than 17 years. So at some point we wanted something more modern and came up with the one on the right-hand side, which is now what you see everywhere when you look at Apache stuff. I think for me, being around for that long, took some getting used to, but it has definitely grown on me by now. But there's more than just software development projects at the ASF. So apart from the development projects, we have some foundation-wide projects or initiatives, and I want to go through a few of them. I can't cover everything, but a few important ones. One very, very important one is the Apache Incubator. So we have currently 50-odd projects in the incubator. They're referred to as podlings in the incubator. They are not yet Apache projects. They have to go through this incubation process, whether they are a new project that has been started from a greenfield development, or if it's a donation from a company or individual towards the ASF. One goal is to make sure that if we get a donation from a company, is that we have sorted out the legal bit around these donations, to make sure that the ASF has a license or a grant to actually distribute the software, the code, under the Apache software license, and to make sure that all contributions and patches are accounted for. It also exists to make sure that we develop the communities. Again, if it's just developers from one company, that's great, but we need more diversity. Basically, you cannot become an Apache project if there's just one company developing or providing active developers. And also to see if is there actually an interest in this project. Can we actually find new developers who are interested in actually working on this project? Is it relevant, basically? The average time varies. Typically, it's around a year to go through the incubation process. It can be much faster, can be much longer, and sometimes it takes very long, or a project even fails to become or to graduate from the incubator, as it's called. Sometimes for various reasons, but typically this all works out, and at some point the project becomes a top-level project. If you're interested, incubator.apache.org explains in a bit more detail how the incubation process works, how you could potentially propose something for the incubator. And that's about new projects. What about old projects? We actually have a project called the Apache Attic. So sometimes we put a project into the attic, so to speak. And it happens. I think we currently have something like between 40 or 50 projects in there. It sometimes simply happens because a technology is no longer relevant. We don't want to have a page, like a web page, that just shows outdated information. So the Apache Attic project provides, or the intent is to be non-impacting to users, basically providing restricted oversight over the code bases, making sure that users can still download the source code, can still download the releases, can get access to the documentation, because yes, even like an outdated technology, is probably still being used by some companies. And there's a management committee around this, which manages the Attic project. The intent is not to rebuild a community. This is really about, this is archiving the project, but making sure everything is still available. Potentially, there may be very rare cases where we would consider a security bug fix for something, but typically the intent is to not make any bug fixes, to not make any more releases. Basically, once it's in there, the project has found its natural end, so to speak. We have a brand management committee, Apache/Foundation/Marks, if you're interested. So basically, it's responsible for setting policy around all these wonderful brands and trademarks, etc., that we have at the ASF, and making sure that companies actually follow these policies, because sometimes, companies intentionally, or in most cases not intentionally, abuse the trademark or the brand in some way because they thought they can just put this on their web page or claim something is their own, but actually it isn't. Or what's a common thing is referring to a project without mentioning it's from Apache. I mentioned this briefly in my founders panel statement this morning. We have a conferences committee. It used to be actually a normal, regular PMC. This has changed now. Now it's a so-called board committee. Under events.apache.org, you find more information. ApacheCon is one of the important bits, but it's more than ApacheCon. The conferences committee is about helping people to organize events around Apache, around the ASF, around a project. That could be a barcamp, it could be a hackathon, a roadshow. It's about educating the world about the work and the mission of the ASF, basically, and to build that developer and user community around these projects. We have a separate committee called community development. So that's not focused on a specific project, on the software development, but on the ASF and the ASF community as a whole. Basically, their goal is to basically, well, first of all, understand, to help you understand how the ASF works, and to provide you with the guidance of how contributions can be done and how to participate, etc. Make it easier for people to figure out how the ASF works and how a project works and how to contribute. A fairly new committee that we have since, I think, May this year is the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I think it's an important topic, and we probably need to do better in this area. But I think one thing we don't necessarily know is, as David Nelly actually mentioned this morning as well, we may not know where the friction actually is. So we are looking forward to the output of this committee to actually determine where are the areas where we need to do better. And how can we do better? What's the strategy? Can we provide a framework and guidance around this and advice to the projects and to our communities? Always important, but kind of like in the background, and you only care about it when it doesn't work, is the infrastructure. So we have servers in, I think, 3 or 4 different data centers in different geographical regions. And we have a team, I forgot actually how many are in the infrastructure team, but we have a team of infrastructure engineers who look after all the services that the ASF provides and all the services that the developers need. Websites, email, code repositories, issue tracking, build servers, DNS, etc., etc. So as I mentioned before, there are some volunteers still involved in this, but we do have paid contractors to make sure we have always someone 24/7 being available who can fix something if something breaks or goes down. We have a security team. Mark Cox, who was here in the founders panel this morning, is the VP of the security team. He gave a few numbers already, how many bug reports we receive on that security@apache.org email address. It's the central point of contact for any kind of potential vulnerability that someone wants to report and share with the ASF. The actual handling is done by the individual PMCs, by the individual project teams. The security team just makes sure that the necessary information gets forwarded to the individual teams, and to basically poke them if they don't respond to it in a timely manner. Some larger teams or certain projects have separate security at email addresses. For example, the web server, Tomcat, spam assassin, etc. Otherwise, we would use the private email address to basically notify the team about, here's someone who is telling us that there's a potential vulnerability. It looks like it is valid, but it's up to the team to assess if it is a valid vulnerability report, and to actually go ahead and fix it, provide an update, provide patches, provide a new release. Important, it says marketing and publicity committee, but the ASF doesn't really do marketing in that sense. It's more about public relations. It's about handling questions from the press. It's about putting out press statements. And Sally Kudari is the VP of the committee and is handling this since a very, very long time. There are different volunteers who help with things like responding to the press. And an important part is that we are very, we stress always that we are vendor neutral. We don't take sides in a press statement or in a release or in a statement, basically. It's basically making sure that we have this basically safe haven, this neutral ground where companies who may or may not be competing against each other on the commercial market, where the developers can come together and contribute to the same project, and both gaining a benefit out of this. We cannot do without donations, as David already mentioned this morning. We have a fundraising committee, so they define our sponsorship program, and we have these various sponsor that help us, basically having a budget, paying for our servers, paying for our data center costs, etc., and paying to some extent for things like the Apache conferences, events, and hackathons, etc. But a large part of our donations, or not a large part, but a sizable chunk of our donations doesn't come from companies, but from individuals. So I find this quite interesting. You can even donate to us in Bitcoin these days if that's what you prefer. We have a legal affairs committee. Unfortunately, we cannot ignore legal things in today's world, and sometimes a project who has legal questions, this is basically their point of contact. So there's an internal mailing list, but there's also a discussion list where legal topics can be discussed. So we have basically pro bono lawyers who provide these services typically. This brings me to the end of my presentation. I think we may have time for a couple of questions. Are there any questions? Yes?
First of all, thank you for your explanations. I just question about the platinum sponsors. There I'm a little bit skeptical about one of the platinum sponsors. Their digital marketing strategy is more like open source and things like that. But I was sitting in the customer side, when I see the direct sales, they don't promote any of the open source, products. They just go in the vendor lock-in mode of, the cloud native services. So I would even say it's unfortunate to see that cloud provider is growing very fast, also. So how do you see it? A little bit skeptical on the platinum sponsors. They were never in the open source world. Suddenly, it changed in the last 3-4 years.
So if I understand the question correctly, it's there's obviously some of the platinum sponsors are not necessarily open source companies, but so you're wondering, okay, like Amazon, they obviously want you to use their AWS service and things like that.
Companies like Microsoft.
Oh yeah, like Microsoft. I think the platinum sponsors. Companies contribute for different reasons. Sometimes it is because they're actually participating in projects at the ASF, but sometimes we have companies who simply just say, well, we're using all your Apache software and we haven't given anything back and we are making, lots of money with it, and here's like a way for us to at least give you some money. We don't contribute in the sense of like software development or paying developers to work on your projects. But it's basically a way for them to donate some money. So I think my answer would be there's various reasons why these platinum sponsors or gold and bronze sponsors actually pay money to the ASF. So there's different reasons. Some of them are open source companies or companies who promote open source, and some of them don't necessarily promote open source. I think that's. Well, you cannot donate to a specific project. You can only donate to the ASF as a whole. And the companies, whether platinum or gold or whatever sponsors, they cannot decide how that money gets used. They don't have any control. Like a sponsorship is just paying money, and that's where it stops. As I said, members in the foundation are individuals. A company cannot give a donation and then expect something in return. They cannot say, I've been a platinum sponsor for 5 years, now I want you to do this. That doesn't work. So that's not how this works. It is really just a charitable donation as far as we are concerned. And to be fair, some of these companies obviously do that because it's part of their it's marketing. It's being seen as contributing to open source in some cases. And some of the companies who are on that list, they were against open source like 20 years ago. So some of these companies have turned around, and we've also seen companies who were seen as the good players in the open source area, but actually no longer really meet that requirement, if you know what I mean. Any more questions? Denise?
I think what he's really worried about is why an organization as large as Apache fought that. But we don't fight day-to-day battles about, is this person contributing enough, is that person contributing enough? Because we've never felt like that was the most important thing. And in fact, Apache has gotten the broad adoption that it has, partly because it doesn't go out and shame companies for not contributing. But they do absolutely go after breaks in the pattern. Like, we can't add additional obligations onto our license. Therefore, people who do that can't play with us. And that's been a force for good in open source for a long time. It's hard to understand the distinction of why Apache doesn't go after more money. But it's organized to run on almost no money for a reason, right? Because then it survives downturns. So you look at some of the really big foundations that are optimizing for money, watch them during the next downturn. Apache will still be here.
Yeah, it's basically, Apache, we depend on donations, but we are a charitable organization, and we don't really pay lobbyists to run around and talk about Apache. Maybe we should, but okay. I think that's what Apache conference is in for, to educate the people about how the ASF works and making sure that we remain neutral. We don't want to be seen like fighting against companies or doing something, but we will do this if there's a reason for this when it comes to the Apache license or the software or something. I think I need to finish my presentation. If you have any further questions, I'll be around at the conference. We have other talks in this track. There's also a talk, I think, tomorrow by Shane Kusura about the Apache Way. So I touched on this already. He's going to go in a bit more detail in a separate session tomorrow about this, so I recommend attending it. Thank you very much.